Salting is the preservation of food with dry edible salt. It is related to pickling in general and more specifically to brining, also known as fermenting, preparing food with brine, that is, salty water, and is one form of curing. It is one of the oldest methods of preserving food, and two historically significant salt-cured foods are salted fish, usually dried, and salted cod or salted herring, and salt-cured meat, such as bacon. Vegetables such as runner beans and cabbage are also often preserved in this manner. Salting is used because most bacteria, fungi, and other potentially pathogenic organisms cannot survive in a highly salty environment, due to the hypertonic nature of salt. Any living cell in such an environment will become dehydrated through osmosis and die or become temporarily inactivated. Fine-grained salts were more expensive but also absorbed moisture faster than coarse salt. Salting could be combined with smoking to produce bacon in peasant homes. Instructions for preserving, salting, freshly killed venison in the 14th century involved covering the animal with bracken as soon as possible and carrying it to a place where it could be butchered, boiled in brine, and dry salted for long-term preservation in a barrel. People in the 14th century could also put salt on vegetables for taste. Salted meat was a staple of the mariner's diet in the Age of Sail. It was stored in barrels, and often had to last for months at sea. The basic Royal Navy diet consisted of salted beef, salted pork, ship's biscuit, and oatmeal, supplemented with smaller quantities of peas, cheese, and butter. Even in 1938, Eric Newby found the diet on the tall ship Moshulu to consist almost entirely of salted meat. Moshulu's lack of refrigeration left little choice as the ship made voyages which could exceed 100 days' passage between ports. Modern. It was discovered in the 19th century that salt mixed with nitrates, such as saltpeter, would color meats red, rather than gray, and consumers at that time then strongly preferred the red-colored meat. The food hence preserved stays healthy and fresh for days, avoiding bacterial decay. Salting in foods. Meat. Salting, either with dry salt or brine, was a common method of preserving meat until the middle of the 20th century, becoming less popular after the advent of refrigeration. Meat that had been preserved in this way was frequently called junk or salt horse. One early method of salt curing meat was corning, or applying large, coarse pellets of salt, which were rubbed into the meat to keep it from spoiling and to preserve it. This term originates from Old English and references the large corns or grains of salt used, see Wiktionary corn. Corned beef retains this name, although it is typically brined today. Salt inhibits the growth of microorganisms by drawing water out of microbial cells through osmosis. Concentrations of salt up to 20% are required to kill most species of unwanted bacteria. Smoking, often used in the process of curing meat, adds chemicals to the surface of meat that reduce the concentration of salt required. Various types of salted meat are staples of the diets of people in North Africa, southern China, Scandinavia, coastal Russia, and in the Arctic. Some of those salted meats, or foods that contain salted meat, are bacon, biltong, cecina, corned beef, ham, jamon, jerky, pastrami, and salt pork. Fish. Drying or salting, either with dry salt or with brine, was the only widely available method of preserving fish until the 19th century. Dried fish and salted fish, or fish both dried and salted, are a staple of diets in the Caribbean, West Africa, North Africa, South Asia, Southeast Asia, southern China, Scandinavia, parts of Canada including Newfoundland, coastal Russia, and in the Arctic. Like other salt-cured meats, it provides preserved animal protein even in the absence of refrigeration. In more recent times, freeze-drying, water-binding humectants, and fully automated equipment with temperature and humidity control have been added. Often a combination of these techniques is used. Religious customs. Jewish and Muslim dietary laws require the removal of blood from freshly slaughtered meat. Salt and brine are used for the purpose in both traditions, but salting is more common in kosher shechita, where it is all but required, than in halal dabiha, as in most cases, draining alone will suffice. Health effects. The American Institute for Cancer Research, AICR, and World Cancer Research Fund International, WCRF, have stated that there is strong evidence that consuming salted foods including salt-preserved fish and salt-preserved foods in general increases risk of stomach cancer, and that the high salt content of processed meat may result in damage to the stomach mucosal lining. The American Cancer Society have stated that stomach cancer risk is increased in people whose diets include large amounts of foods preserved by salting, such as salted fish and meat and pickled vegetables. Additionally, an excessive intake of salt has a dose-response relationship with elevated blood pressure, increasing the risk of several cardiovascular diseases. Water in food can cause microorganisms to grow, which makes the food more likely to spoil. Using natural preserving agents such as sugar and salt, the water available can be chemically reduced and, as such, prevent the spread of microorganisms. People have used salt to preserve meat, fish, and vegetables since agriculture first began. Throughout history, people have devised highly inventive ways of preserving food. They have developed a large number of physical and chemical methods. Salt, sugar, and vinegar are food additives which have been used for this purpose for thousands of years. Bacon was already being preserved by salting in ancient Rome, where the salting tub was an essential item in every household wishing to maintain its provisions. Egyptians used earthenware jars for salting and the Gauls used wooden kegs. Later, in the Middle Ages, kitchens had an impressive wooden salting chest. In pre-industrial times, salt played an extremely important role in preserving food, and over 2/3 of the salt available was used for this purpose. Salt is one of the oldest food additives. Water in food can be more or less available, whether bonded with other molecules or not. The greater the water availability, measured by the water activity or O scale, the more microorganisms can develop and the more likely the food is to spoil. Drying food reduces the amount of water available for microorganisms. Adding sugar or salt acts in the same way, by binding the water in the food. A 10% concentration of salt acts on the pH of proteins and inhibits the growth of a large number of germs. However, it has an adverse effect on fats, causing oxidation and rancidity. Meat is salted using a mixture of salts, including saltpetre, and sugar. The sugar counteracts the salty taste and provides the bacteria with energy to transform the nitrates in saltpetre into nitrites. This turns the meat pink. Without this process, it would be a rather unappetizing gray. Salting is often followed by another treatment, such as smoking or drying. Salt behind long-life products. Fishermen have a long history of salting their fish while at sea to protect their catch. Cod, for example, is salted and dried at the fishing site, resulting in a new product, salted cod, which is simply a new version of cod. Herring is pickled whole or in fillets and preserved in traditional herring barrels. The technique for preserving herring in brine dates back to the 14th century. Caviar involves a salting process for preserving sturgeon eggs. Viande de Grisons beef, which has been salted and then air-dried, is a traditional delicacy of a mountainous region in Switzerland. Sauerkraut is fermented cabbage which has first been soaked in brine. Salting can be the basis of more sophisticated products, such as the Roman garum, a condiment sauce made from salted and fermented fish dried in the sun in large earthenware jars, and the Egyptian lupin seeds preserved in herb-flavored brine. Salt has been used as a food safety aid since ancient times. While salt helps preserve food by reducing water content and disrupting microbial cells, it takes very high salt concentrations, around 10% or more, to prevent bacterial growth much higher than what is found in most foods you eat. Beef jerky, pickles, and smoked salmon are just a few examples of foods that are preserved using salt. While it can keep them fresher longer, it doesn't entirely rule out the possibility they can give you food poisoning. This article goes over how salt is used to keep food fresh, including the types of foods that are commonly preserved this way. How salt preserves food. As a preservative, salt works in two ways. 1. Salt dries food out. Salt draws water out of food and dehydrates it. All living things need water and cannot grow without it, including bacteria that can cause food poisoning. For example, in butter, salt draws water out and leaves fat behind, which helps butter from spoiling. 2. Salt kills microbes. High salt is toxic to most but not all microbes because of the effect of water pressure. Water goes between cells in the environment to make the concentration of salt, and other solutes, the same on both sides of the cell. In very high salt solutions, many microbes will explode because of the difference in pressure between the outside and inside of the organism. High salt can also be toxic to processes inside microbes, like DNA and enzymes. Solutions that are high in sugar have the same effects on microbes, which is why it is used as a preservative in foods like jams and jellies. Misconceptions about salt as preservative. If you assume that salty foods aren't a food poisoning risk, think again. While it's true that many of the bacteria that can cause food poisoning do not grow well in salty conditions, there are some that need salt to grow. Called halophils, they don't exactly love salt, but they can survive in it because they have a warning system for detecting very salty conditions that helps them avoid losing water, halotolerant. It's also important to know that bacteria are not the only thing that can make you sick. Molds can also be a source of foodborne illness and are able to survive higher salt levels than bacteria. Thank you for watching this video.